Bakura thought he was untouchable. For years, his name haunted the Lake Chad Basin like a ghost that refused to die. He was the heir to Shekau's terror, the shadow that lingered after villages burned and classrooms fell silent. They called him elusive, merciless, the mastermind behind kidnappings that tore families apart. Mothers whispered his name in fear, and soldiers cursed it in frustration. But on the morning of August 15, 2025, the desert had eyes. In the isolated marshlands of Chilawa, Niger's armed forces unleashed precision strikes that shattered the myth of his invincibility. 3 bombs fell like thunder, and when the dust lifted, Bakura was gone, this time not in rumor, but in fire. This was not just a military operation, it was a rupture in history. A moment when a nation long bruised by jihadist cruelty declared, "Enough." The strike echoed far beyond the shores of Lake Chad, reminding the world that sovereignty can still roar from unexpected places. If you believe Africa's silent battles deserve to be heard, stay until the end. Like, comment, and subscribe, because stories like this must not vanish into silence. According to official reports confirmed by African news outlets, the operation took place at dawn on August 15, 2025, in the marshlands of Chilawa. Niger's armed forces executed 3 surgical airstrikes described as flawless. Bakoura, along with several senior Boko Haram leaders, was killed instantly. Dozens of fighters fell with him, ending years of fear concentrated in one elusive figure. For the people of Diffa, the news was received with both relief and caution. Many celebrated, yet many remembered Boko Haram had been declared wounded before, only to rise again. Which raises the real question: what does Bakura's elimination truly mean for the future of Lake Chad and the sovereignty of Niger? He was born in the shadows of northern Nigeria, a young man swept into a tide of violence that began long before his own name was feared. His given name was Ibrahim Amda, but the world came to know him only as Bakura, a name that, in time, struck terror across the Lake Chad Basin. To understand his rise is to trace the roots of Boko Haram itself, a movement that began in 2009 with a simple yet sinister creed to reject Western education and impose a radical order through blood and fire. What started as sermons in Maiduguri grew into a war that claimed nearly 40,000 lives and forced millions from their homes when Abubakar Shekau, the infamous leader of Boko Haram, seized control. He turned extremism into spectacle. Villages burned in the night, suicide bombings turned marketplaces into graveyards, and children became bargaining chips in a ruthless game of fear. Among those loyal foot soldiers was Bakura, a quiet but unflinching figure, absorbing Shekau's methods like scripture. To the men around him, he was disciplined, faithful, and mercilessly committed to the communities living under his shadow. He was already a monster in the making. In 2021, when Shekau himself met his violent end, many wondered whether Boko Haram would collapse under the weight of leadership struggles. Instead, like a serpent shedding its skin, the movement found in Bakura a successor willing to preserve its most radical essence. While splinter factions flirted with compromise, he doubled down on cruelty. Where others hesitated, he ordered mass kidnappings. Where others weighed strategy, he pursued terror for its own sake. He did not merely continue Shekau's legacy, he amplified it. Perhaps the most haunting crime tied to his name was the Kuriga kidnapping in March 2024. More than 300 school children were torn from their classrooms in broad daylight. Images of crying children herded into trucks, their uniforms stained with dust and fear, seared themselves into Nigeria's national memory. The world erupted in outrage, yet Bakura remained untouched. Mocking both governments and international powers, parents searched desperately for their sons and daughters. Entire villages emptied, fearing they would be next. For many, Kuriga became shorthand for the failure of state protection and for the terrifying reach of Bakura's hand. To Americans, this story may echo faintly of tragedies closer to home. Imagine for a moment the horror of Sandy Hook magnified 100-fold, not in minutes, but in years of repetition. Imagine if every school shooting that scarred America had the same perpetrator, one man, vowing to strike again and again. That is how Bakura loomed in the psyche of West Africa, recurring nightmare. An enemy whose face was never captured, whose name was whispered like a curse. And yet, as Bakoura's infamy grew, so too did the resilience of those forced to live. Beneath his reign of fear, communities learned to rebuild after each attack. Vigilantes formed defense groups. Women and children displaced by war built makeshift schools and refugee camps, insisting that education, the very target Boko Haram despised, would not be erased. In their defiance, sovereignty found its truest voice. But Bakura thrived on this cycle of destruction and resistance. Each reprisal fed his legend. He became not just a commander, but a symbol of inevitability, the proof that violence could outlast peace. This was his greatest weapon, the belief that he could not be stopped. "We will always return," his fighters shouted after burning villages in Diffa and Borno. And for years, they did. That is why the operation of August 15th was more than an airstrike. It was an answer to years of humiliation, a challenge to the narrative Bakura himself had built. Niger's armed forces did not just kill a man, they shattered a myth. They declared that even the most elusive ghost can bleed, and that sovereignty means daring to strike first. Yet even in this victory, questions linger. How many times has Bakura been reported dead, only to reappear in another ambush? How many families dare not celebrate, fearing this is only another false dawn? It is here, in this fragile balance between relief and dread, that we find the true meaning of his elimination. Because the battle is not only for land, it is for trust, for the faith of a people who have learned to doubt every promise of peace. For Niger, for Nigeria, for Chad, and for Cameroon, the death of Bakura symbolizes a chance to reclaim hope. But hope, like fire, must be guarded, fed, and shared. Without vigilance, the embers of Boko Haram will smolder back into flames. And so, as we tell this story, let us pause not only to recount the downfall of one man, but to honor the resilience of those who lived under his cruelty. To the mothers of Kuriga, to the children still waiting in camps, to the soldiers who patrolled dusty roads with rifles older than themselves, this victory is yours. If you believe no child should ever be stolen from a classroom, if you believe courage is stronger than fear, then let your voice join this moment. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because silence is the soil in which terror grows. And today, more than ever, Africa needs voices that refuse to be silent. For decades, Niger was never considered a country capable of daring raids. Its army was often described in international reports as under-equipped and overstretched. In Washington and Paris, Niger was cast as a junior partner, a staging ground for foreign troops, never the protagonist of its own destiny. But on August 15th, 2025, that script was rewritten in fire. The gamble began long before the bombs fell. For weeks, Nigerian intelligence tracked Bakura across the marshes of Lake Chad. Satellites, drones, and human sources pieced together a puzzle that had eluded far more powerful armies for years. Bakura had survived French operations, evaded Nigerian offensives, and even mocked multinational task forces. Yet here was Niger, acting alone, betting its sovereignty on a single surgical blow. The mission was not just about killing one man. It was about proving to the world, and to its own people, that Niger could act with precision. Courage and independence. In the dusty war rooms of Niamey, commanders weighed every risk. If the strike failed, Bakura would mock them again. Boko Haram would retaliate, and Niger's reputation would crumble. But if it succeeded, the psychological victory would resonate far beyond the battlefield. The plan resembled operations often associated with America's own war on terror. In fact, Nigerian officers studied the daring U.S. raid that killed Osama bin Laden in 2011. The parallels were not lost. Both targets were elusive. Both had become symbols of unending fear. And both operations carried enormous risk. But where? The U.S. had stealth helicopters and Navy SEALs. Niger had aging jets and pilots who flew with more courage than equipment. What America executed with cutting-edge technology, Niger attempted with grit and faith. At dawn on August 15th, the gamble was placed. 3 jets lifted into the pale sky, their engines roaring over Diffa. Each pilot knew this was no ordinary mission. It was history in motion. The coordinates were locked: Chilawa, an island long infested by insurgents. The marshes were quiet, but the silence was deceptive. Beneath the reeds, fighters waited, believing themselves invisible. The first strike came like a lightning bolt. Villagers nearby heard thunder without rain. The second and third followed, each bomb falling with surgical precision. For Nigerian soldiers who had buried comrades after years of ambushes, the news was electric justice delivered from the skies. The military declared it a flawless operation. For the people of Diffa, long trapped between despair and defiance, it was a breath of air after years of suffocation. When coalition after coalition had failed to bring peace, some suggested foreign support behind the scenes. Others wondered if intelligence came from unlikely partners. Yet within Niger, the message was clear. This was their operation, their triumph, their declaration of sovereignty. Americans may recognize the paradox. When the bin Laden raid was announced, the U.S. celebrated, but it also braced for retaliation. So too does Niger now stand on a knife's edge. Bakoura's death is a symbol, but symbols do not erase networks. The men who followed him are not yet defeated, and revenge may already be brewing in the cafes of Niamey. This is the deeper lesson for Africa and for anyone who believes in sovereignty. Strength is not only in weapons, but in the will to decide your own battles, to risk failure for the sake of dignity. Bakura is gone, but Boko Haram still breathes. The gamble Niger placed may ignite a new chapter of war, one where victory and danger walk hand in hand, if courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Then this is Niger's story of suffocation and defiance. The Lake Chad region has been a theater of despair for over a decade. Farmers who once counted their lives in tilapia and millet now count their losses in graves. Boko Haram turned the shoreline into a battlefield, and every ripple of water carried the memory of violence. Yet the elimination of Bakura is a weapon. 2. Communities now ask, if Bakura could fall, what else is possible? Could Diffa? Could Borno? Could Lake Chad itself dream of freedom again? Bakura's death is not the end of the storm, but the beginning of recovery. And just as in America, recovery depends not only on governments, but on ordinary people who refuse to surrender. Still, hope in Lake Chad is cautious. Too many times has celebration turned to mourning. Boko Haram has splintered before, and new factions have risen from the ashes. ISWAP remains strong, exploiting the chaos to recruit and terrorize. In villages near the Nigerian border, people still sleep with one ear open, listening for gunfire in the night. Mothers keep their children close, fearing another convoy of trucks could appear at any moment. Hope here is not naive, it is hope sharpened by memory. But fragile hope is still hope, and to terrorists, that makes it dangerous. Every child who returns to school, every farmer who plants seeds again, every market that reopens is a defeat to the ideology of fear. Boko Haram thrived not only on weapons, but on despair. Bakura's shadow was strongest when people believed there was no alternative. Today, the very act of believing in tomorrow is a quiet revolution. The elimination of Bakura has also forced the world to pay attention, however briefly, to a region often ignored. News outlets ran headlines. Analysts debated the implications. But beyond policy papers and security briefings, the true meaning is found in the laughter of children chasing a soccer ball in a refugee camp, or in the sigh of an old man who dares to say, "Maybe now we can sleep." These are the victories that cannot be measured in statistics, but in the rhythm of human lives. Sovereignty, at its core, is not only about borders or armies. It is about the dignity of ordinary existence, the ability to farm, to trade, to learn without fear of abduction or massacre. And this is why Bakura's elimination matters. It restores, however briefly, the possibility of normal life. In the Sahel, normal life itself is revolutionary, yet the burden is heavy. Governments must seize this moment, not to declare victory, but to build trust. Roads must be secured. Schools must be rebuilt. Aid must reach the displaced. Otherwise, despair will return, and with it, the lure of extremism. In America, after September 11th, there was a surge of unity, but also a challenge. How to translate one moment of resilience into long-term security? Niger faces a similar trial. For the Lake Chad Basin, the next chapter is unwritten. But one truth has already been proven: even giants can fall. Bakoura's elimination reminds us that no terror is eternal, no oppressor immortal. The struggle continues, but the myth of invincibility has been broken. And that fracture, however small, is enough to let light in. If you believe that peace in the Sahel is not just Africa's responsibility, but a heritage of all humanity, then join the conversation. Share your thoughts, add your voice, because every word of solidarity is a stone against the fortress of fear. And history is not written by those who stand silent, it is written by those who choose to hope. Bakura is dead, but the war is not. In the days after August 15th, celebrations echoed through Diffa. Yet even in the jubilation, unease grew like a shadow. Because in the Sahel, one truth has repeated itself for over a decade: when one head of the Hydra is cut, another grows in its place. Already, whispers spread of commanders preparing to fill the void. Boko Haram, fractured though it may be, is not dismantled. Its most radical branch still breathes in the marshes and forests of Borno. And ISWAP, the Islamic State's affiliate in West Africa, remains strong, eager to absorb Bakoura's orphan fighters. In fact, to some observers, his death may accelerate recruitment, turning martyrdom into a rallying cry. This is the twist: victory is real, but it is not final. The people who cheered may yet face retaliation. Militants thrive on cycles of revenge. Each funeral becomes a sermon, each defeat a seed for new violence. And beyond the battlefield lies a darker question: who has been feeding this fire all along? For years, analysts have traced the tangled web of financing and weapons. Guns that killed in Diffa often bore serial numbers. From distant wars, cash flowed not only from local smuggling, but from networks stretching across borders. Some came from illicit trade: gold, cattle, even people. Others, more troubling, appeared linked to global actors who claimed to fight terror while benefiting from its persistence. Here is the uncomfortable truth: extremism in Lake Chad did not survive this long on ideology alone. It was sustained, sometimes deliberately, by those who found chaos profitable. To strike Bakura is to strike a symbol, but to end the war is to confront the hidden patrons who keep the battlefield alive. And that task is far harder. If you believe Africa's silent battles deserve to be heard, then do not scroll past this story. Add your voice, leave a comment, share this video, and subscribe, not just for the algorithm, but for solidarity. Every click, every word, every share is a stand against fear. History is written not by those who stay silent, but by those who speak, who hope, and who act. Today, let the world hear you.